Hey everybody, Leah Klett here with the Christian Post, and my guest today is best-selling author Rebekah Lyons. Her brand new book is titled Building a Resilient Life: How Adversity Awakens Strength, Hope, and Meaning. I am so honored to have you on today. You just have so much incredible wisdom that you always impart, especially to women and to moms. And your latest book is no exception, Building a Resilient Life. So share with me the path that led you to write this incredibly timely book.
Well, it began in 2020. I think about 4 weeks into quarantine, I was on a mental health summit on Zoom, and we were talking about next gen and how strong were they in their resiliency. And I remember feeling like, well, I'm launching kids that are at the time 16, 18, and 20, and all their peers are struggling. And we were very early into lockdown, and little did we know that within 12 weeks, suicidal ideation would triple, starting in preteen ages. And just being home, isolated, away from peers, away from regulatory rhythms that help calm the brain. There was just a kind of this interesting thought that, wow, they're not prepared for what's coming at them. And I thought, okay, I'm going to definitely write this for them. And then as I got into the research and our oldest started to struggle. He has a Down syndrome diagnosis, and he had probably the hardest year of his life because he's largely nonverbal. And when he just didn't do Zoom well, a lot of kiddos with special needs really struggled with Zoom because there's so much of them and their interaction is nonverbal. And so because of his spiral, I think our whole family kind of spiraled for about the next 18 months. And I realized that I needed resilience as a parent. Our kids need it. Our whole society needs it. It's not a muscle that we've developed, quite frankly. And in fact, I started to study old wars, like historically over the centuries. How has humanity survived without clinical psychology and antidepressants? I mean, this stuff is all emerged in the last 100 years, but before that, how did centuries past survive trauma? And it turns out in every world war before COVID, mental health would increase actually in times of struggle because there was a sense of agency and purpose, shared mission, shared enemy, alignment, and even actionable steps you could take to help be a part of the solution. And I think what happened with COVID is the terms kept changing, it kept prolonging. And because historically, society has also healed from primarily through community first, second through regulatory rhythms, third through a belief in a higher power, and fourth would be medicine. We switched it on its head in 2020, and we lost the ability to connect with our community. We lost the ability to have regulatory rhythms in our lives. We lost the ability to gather as a church, right? And kind of like have that shared faith. And then we lost the ability, the only thing we had left was medicine. And medicine helps you cope with something. It doesn't help you heal. And so unfortunately, that's why mental health declined in this particular moment, because we were told to go home and sit down and be alone and wait. And there was really nothing that you could do effectively other than, wear a mask or eventually take a vaccine or whatever was told that would help solve this problem. But it was still so ambiguous. The loss was so ambiguous. So I studied a lot about ambiguous loss from Dr. Pauline Boss in the 70s, and it's loss without an end date. And it's when you lose psychological presence, but you still have physical presence of a loved one, which is what we lost with Kade. It was just really hard. He was spinning out, but he was still there, but he didn't have words, and he almost lost his window of tolerance and began to kind of hurt himself because it was just all going inward. And I felt like Kade was a metaphor for all of us, that he just didn't have a filter to pretend. And so that's just really woke me up to this idea that if we don't develop some muscle, like some skills for resilience, and what did other centuries do? What are we missing? How do we put those building blocks back into our lives for our generation? then we need to stop repeating, we're the most lost, depressed, anxious, angry of civilization that we've seen in history. Well, that's probably true, but we can just keep repeating that refrain, or we can decide, what are we going to do about that? And so I wrote the book as a response to going, what are we going to do? I'm with everybody preaching to the choir. Yes, we're in a bad spot, but if we don't have real practical steps of agency to take, then we're going to just kind of succumb to that narrative and just kind of be swept up in it and feel a little powerless to it. And I think we're all tired of feeling powerless to something when we have been given the tools by God, through scriptures, through neuroscience, through research, through community, to be resilient.
And you outline these 5 rules to building a resilient life. So just briefly kind of outline what these are, these very tangible ways we can build this muscle.
Yeah, so it begins with rule 1. So 5 rules of resilience. I always like a framework for my audience, for my readers. I want it to be practical and approachable and backed in research and faith. And so the first one is name the pain, because you cannot heal what is hidden. And so it goes all the way back to kind of just the first step to healing on a road to recovery is to acknowledge what is, and to get whatever's inside of your body outside of your body. So speaking with your mouth and confiding with someone, the secret, the shame, the thing that you've hidden for so long from everyone, and especially yourself, because there's just too much fear attached to being vulnerable. And so it's getting back to honesty and vulnerability and the bravery that requires first. For me, it began with God, and then it spilled out into my husband, and then it eventually spilled out to my kids and then my friends. But you've got to start somewhere. And the reason why our bodies spin out in anxiety and depression, panic disorder, whatever you want to talk about, is it's unresolved grief and trauma stored up in your body. And a lot of times those things are hidden and invisible because they've been so buried back in our subconscious that they don't come out until they're triggered by a similar environment that gives you those same senses and feelings that make those reactions emerge. And so it helps by just exploring and getting curious and going back to like your story of origin. So name the pain is the first thing, because you can't heal what is hidden, and then you get it out, and then you bring it to the light, and because it's out of your brain and your body, it no longer kind of loops, but it allows other people to speak into it and give you perspective. Like, you're not a terrible wife and a mom, Rebekah, but you keep telling yourself you are because of some unresolved stuff from a long time ago that's buried in shame. And so just having room and permission to do that began, and I share vulnerably kind of what that looked for me. You can't write if you haven't lived. So I usually live this stuff long before I write about it, because I'm seeing how effective it is in my own life, in my friend's life, in my family's life. And it's the research bears it out. So name the pain is the first one. The second one would be shift the narrative. And once you get it out, then people wrestle with it with you, and they go, hey, that's not what I see. Have you considered this? And so that's why therapy is so good. Friendship and community is so good. You've got other brains that get to actually kind of go back and forth with you. It's not just you on your own on an island trying to find healing. We really do need one another for that role. And so the shifting the narrative goes back to, even for me, a person of faith, going, well, what does God have to say about this? Is everything doomsday and there's no hope? No, that's not what faith would lend me to believe ultimately. While it might be hard right now, that doesn't mean that I'm alone and that this is the end of my story. And so coming back to, how do I reframe the narrative, no matter what the topic is: politics, health, education, anger online, like, you get to decide what you say to yourself. And so there's sections in there about shifting the narrative and preaching to yourself and renewing the mind and just really overcoming toxic thinking with truth that is life-giving. And the third rule is called embrace adversity. So we've got name the pain, shift the narrative, and embrace adversity. And embrace adversity means, now, because I have shifted a narrative And after naming the pain, I now can look at anxiety differently and I can confront it. I can turn towards pain. I don't have to keep running from it, avoiding it, escaping it, and numbing out. Instead, I can go, okay, I'm going to treat anxiety as a friend that is teaching me resilience. And it's almost like a check engine light. And it's telling me when my body is triggered physiologically with anxiety, all is not well. There's something lying latent that I am running from and spinning out. So I need to get honest. I don't just receive a diagnosis as if that is who I am, because it's not my identity. Whatever disorder you've been prescribed, it just describes what's coming against you. And so when we reframe adversity or any diagnosis we get from a clinician as our identity, but instead what we're wrestling with, what's come against us, then we don't fear that will never change. We actually can kind of give fear a name and then go, okay, so then what do I do to respond so that this can change? I really am so much about whatever mental health struggles we have. That is not our destiny. It never has been. It was not appointed for us to be that person. It's just describing what has come against us through unresolved grief and trauma. So therefore, what do we do in response? We see it differently and we confront it. And then I've learned the more you confront fear, the more it shrinks. The more you run and avoid it, it grows. So it's just kind of basic cognitive behavioral therapy. You turn towards the pain so that you can learn how to overcome. And then the fourth rule would be make meaning. And that is all about your pain becoming purpose if you let it. There's always someone walking alongside you or behind you, walking the same story that you can give back to. You can just find a lot of fulfillment in helping others who've struggled or struggling with what you've struggled. And you can just make beauty out of the ashes. I mean, people have done it for centuries. The last rule would be endure together. And that's just, quite frankly, back to historically how we heal from trauma, is that we can't build resilient lives alone. Our healing is done in a group of belonging, in a shared community that overlaps a lot, that bears one another's burdens, and that reminds what is true. And then all of a sudden this becomes resilient communities. And that's really where I get local in that last rule about what's happened for all of us since 2020 is we're all more local. And we can embrace that. As a global society, we can embrace being local because it's the people you can call in the middle of the night. It can be over in about 5 minutes when a child is sick and his spouse is out of town or whatever. Those are the kind of resilient people you need, in your team.
We'll talk more about that because this is so interesting to me. What are some ways we can find these resilient communities to do life together?
Yeah, so I started a group every Tuesday morning, like a year and a half ago. But before that, I was doing it a little more infrequent. I think if you can somehow create a weekly book club, a weekly play group, a weekly something, but you have it without fail every week. It's just on the calendar at a standing time that everyone plans for, and it becomes a central place, a hub. I found when I tried to do bi-weekly or monthly, it was not enough because you would miss one and then all of a sudden too much time goes by. And I really think women, men too, I've seen men thrive in the same exact format. When you have a weekly thing that's just not going to change, and even if the host can't be there, somebody else fills in, maybe the spot might change, but you don't have to have food. You don't have to have a big spread. You don't have to have a clean house, but you just need to make space for people to gather. And when I was young and I had littles, we did a weekly play group on a Tuesday. Now we do a weekly book club and Bible study on Tuesday. So it really is just about your season of life. But all the kids came with us when they were little. They crawled around on the floor together, or they would get in each other's. They learned sharing. It's not the worst thing. And the moms were able to kind of compare notes and go, oh my goodness, I totally get it. We just underestimate the value of gathering weekly outside of church, outside of school, but just a smaller group, 10, 12, whatever, 8, where we're just going to go hey, we're going to just show up. We're going to show up and we're going to be honest about where we're at. And we're also going to hold space and practice empathy for where you're at and just make sure that nobody's trying to fix the other person, but real friendship needs reciprocity where both parties are vulnerable. Both are not trying to fix each other. Both are just trying to be present while people are walking through hard things. If we just did that honestly, we'd be 1,000 times healthier, because part of our anxiety and depression is rooted out of loneliness and isolation. And we always act like we don't have time to get together, when it's the very act of getting together that heals us. So if we're going to go to a therapist, we should maybe begin by going to a group of friends weekly that says, hey, you don't have to pay here. We're going to listen. We're going to show up. We're going to listen. We're not going to judge or condemn or fix. We're just going to like empathize and be here. There's nothing more valuable in what I've learned in 40 plus years. There's nothing more valuable for my mental health than having healthy friendships that are present and proximate and consistent.
Rebekah, how did you see Kade's life change, your own life change, the health of your family changed after implementing these 5 steps that you outline in the book?
Well, I found that it was harder for Cade to name the pain because he, has a hard time with vocabulary. But when I would get on his level and I say, hey, are you okay? Do you want a hug? He would like just let down. He would start bawling. He would let me hold him. He wanted my presence and my attention and my attunement as much as anybody who's like able to express themselves. And he felt seen, and he felt my presence. He felt our whole family, like not trying to go like, what's wrong with Cade, and talking over Cade or talking about Cade in front of Cade, but going like, hey, eyes locked, what's going on? And are you okay? Mommy loves you. And then he would just kind of let down. The body really wants to let down, but it only does it when it feels safe. And it feels like there's attunement, which is someone's paying attention to them right in their face, eye contact, being fully present with them, not judging them or condemning them. And so I found that what I was able to give Cade, I finally became able to give to other people. And I was able to receive that as well. And so I think that naming the pain was modeled really beautifully with him. And then I would say shifting the narrative. He doesn't have the cognition. His IQ's in the 40s. So he's on the more severe end because of some birth trauma. But he definitely is the barometer of our home. He knows when there's joy. He knows when there's tension, right? Like we sense before we can even make sense of what we sense. Like you can be completely nonverbal or an infant out of the womb and read depressed language. You can read anger, you can discern, and you can recoil even in the womb when you hear angry language. Like I did a lot of study on early childhood attachment and how much our kids are actually absorbing. And so Cade was a picture of that even in his 20, going, he's almost like a child or an infant who's absorbing a lot. And it made me very aware of like how to shift that narrative, because he's picking up on stuff, whether or not I think he is. I would say he modeled embrace adversity. Like I just found him being brave. I found him starting to approach things, and we did get some medication for him that helped regulate a little, but there were still side effects, right? He lost like 10 pounds in 8 weeks on a slender frame. He would have some accidents at school because the bladder control was a little different. I mean, that's hard at 20, right? Like he's still a grown man. And so I think we're still adjusting. We're trying to wean right now, quite frankly, now that we're back into better regulatory rhythms where he's social and he's with people. It's been helpful to wean slowly. So I'm hopeful and optimistic, but it's been really sweet to see kiddos with special needs are just like us. They're all processing and absorbing what they're taking in, what they're hearing, what we're kind of putting out. So it's very interesting to me how much he's modeled that for me. And my youngest daughter, Joy, who I wound up adopting with Down syndrome, she's 10. We've had her 5 years from China. And, there are bookends, and they're very good for us because they tether us, and they also let us know when mom and dad or older siblings are anxious, afraid, angry, whatever. Like all of a sudden we've got someone right in front of us going, hey, we don't really understand why you're this way, but we know you're acting this way. And maybe you should take inventory of what's going on with you emotionally.
How can we be present and really pay attention to our children, to the people in front of us?
Yeah, so I write a long chapter about this in the book called Grow Incrementally. And it's talking about attention and retraining the brain, because what happens is for all of us right now marks the 16th anniversary of the iPhone. And so we have a generation that's been raised on a screen below us, and we're all talking about how hard it is for them. They're always on screens. They've only ever known screens. That's why they're so anxious and depressed. And I want to go, this is not just about the kids. This is about the parents that got an iPhone 16 years ago, who raised those kids without paying attention to them. And now I'm talking to myself right now. My daughter was 2 when I got an iPhone. And unfortunately, trauma is defined as fractured patternless caregiving. It's almost kind of this like you're paying attention, but you're not. You know what I mean? Like imagine nursing an infant and you're on your phone. And those are the first days where a child is looking back to see who's looking back at them. They're looking at the eyes of the mother and the caregiver going, do you see me? Can we attach? Can we bond? The whole point of nursing is bonding. And the minute a phone gets in the middle of that, interrupts and distracts that attachment. And so I'm very passionate about this. I wish I had known this then, because those kids will seem fine. But what will happen is they'll get to puberty, and then all of a sudden they will be anxious and depressed and afraid because they didn't have that bedrock foundation of attachment and belonging and safety when they needed parents to give them eye contact, to put phones down, to crawl in their bed and read a bedtime book. To get on the floor. I was one of those moms that was super busy, always wanted the kids to play together, and I'd kind of monitor it and give them entertainment, but they don't care about that. They want to just join you in the kitchen and pull up a stool and help you stir. They don't need their own play kitchen. So it just has reframed having joy now later in life, going like, I don't need 3 play kitchens from Pottery Barn. I just need a step stool and a whisk. And she wants to stir when I'm making bread last night. And it's helped me stop putting so much pressure on entertaining our kids, but instead engaging our kids. And they want that way more, way, way more. I would encourage parents to take a tech detox if you can this summer, especially if you're home when your kids are home. You can decide what that looks like. But if you get off social media, at least for a season, you'll just have a lot more time to look at your kids and play with them and engage them. And this is not a shame fest. Trust me, I'm the first guilty of this. But this is more now that we know awareness breeds action. And what can we do to recover that? You can still recover relationship with your kids. My kids now are very close to me, but it did take some work. And initially it was costly. And so I caution people who are online a lot or on socials a lot, just make sure you have boundaries with hours when you're doing that and when you're not.
Ultimately, is your hope for building a resilient life, and who primarily is this book for?
Honestly, it's funny, all the men who are texting me that they are loving the book, like maybe the wife bought it and then they kind of snagged it and won't give it back till they're done. I really did write this for both men and women. My husband was my editor. Another guy, Seth, a dear friend, was my editor. So both my editors were men. I want it to be full of research. I want it to be, academic and smart, but also vulnerable and raw, so that it would kind of appeal to where people are, because I think people find their stories in yours. So if you can find words for them, then they can resonate with that. But then also giving the framework and the tools from people that are much smarter than I am, and just bringing all of those as a chorus back into the same piece of work. So my hope is that it's for anyone weary, maybe believe the lie that it's not going to change. I know I did. And that life is just going to always be hard, or that that they were not made to overcome, that they're just going to always struggle and be weak. So I just want people to be reminded they're stronger than they think, for single moms, for our kids, for marriages, for families. Honestly, there's not just one person. I think anyone that wants to grow in their resilience, I think this book can be a resource for them.